All right, so our first target is word questions. How do we deal with the word questions? What helps us understand where the right answer is? So there are a couple of things that you need to remember about the word questions. First of all, you do not just try to remember from the dictionary what is this word, because you're asked not what is the dictionary definition of this word. You are asked what is the definition of this word in the context. So you should always go to the context and try each answer choice in this place and see what works best in the context. So it's all about the context. It's never about the dictionary definition. It's always about the context. All right? So this is the first thing. Now, what can help you understand what is the definition of this word in the context? Where do you look at the context and how do you recognize all the hints about the definition of the word? Let's discuss. First of all, let's look at this example. Timothy is cold when he saw the dent in his new car. We don't know the word scold and we're asked about the word scold and we need to guess what is the most obvious meaning of the word scold. We of course see here that he did this is a verb, so he did it when he saw the dent in his new car. We see that he has a new car and there's a dent. It's probably very disappointing. So we think maybe scold is an expression, maybe a facial expression that he had when he saw the dent in his new car, when he became disappointed. So we now think that, okay, scold is probably a facial expression or something that he did because he was upset, right? So let's look at this example. Timothy is cold when he saw Aunt Lauren. So now we don't really know what scold means, right? Because if we only have this sentence, we're not gonna know what is scold because we don't know how he feels about Aunt Lauren, if he's happy to see her or not, what he does when he sees her, right? So we have no clue now. So this sentence is not gonna help us to understand what is scold. But if this happens, we should look for other sentences. Perhaps there are next sentences which are gonna tell us what is scold, all right? For example, Timothy is cold when he saw Aunt Lauren. Whenever she came for visit, pleasant family conversations turned into angry family feuds. So now we see, right? So if every time she comes to visit, they have a fight, right? So then probably Timothy is not very happy to see her. So scold, again, we now see, is probably something that he does when he is upset, right? For example, his facial expression. All right, another example could be, a scold came over Timothy's face, oh, I'm sorry for the mistake in the word Timothy, when he saw Aunt Lauren. Whenever she came for visit, pleasant family conversations turned into angry family feuds. His look of displeasure deepened when he noticed she was carrying an overnight bag. Here we even have the definition, right? Here, if we go to read the third sentence after this one, after this word, we see the entire synonym of the word scold, his look of displeasure. So now we are sure that a scold, or a verb scold, means have a look of displeasure, right? A facial expression when someone is upset. So now we are sure. So sometimes you can find out what is the definition of the word just reading one sentence, but sometimes you need to read 2 or even 3 sentences to find the definition of the word, all right? So let's have a look at how do you look for different hints that can help you find out what is the meaning of the word. So what hints can be there? The first one is verb to be. This is easy. For example, we have salmon is a fish. For example, we don't know what is salmon, but we see the verb to be is, and then we see the definition, fish. So now we know salmon is a fish, right? So we see this is the synonym or this is the category, this is the word that explains what is salmon, all right? So the first one is to be. The second, commas. Sometimes the definition of the word is written in commas. For example, mercury, the silver-colored metal used in thermometers, is usually in a liquid form. For example, we don't know what is mercury, but here in the commas we have the definition, right? It's that silver metal that we have in the thermometers. We all remember thermometers, this silver thing that is very dangerous. If you break the thermometer, this is mercury. In your language, this is blah, blah, blah. So we understand what is mercury just because there are commas, and in between the commas we have the definition. So sometimes if you see a word and then there are commas, look, maybe there is definition, all right? Sometimes it can be the word which is, right? So this is even better, this is even more obvious, which is, and then we have the definition of mercury. All right, also some other punctuation can help us understand what is the meaning of the word. For example, dashes. Mercury, dash, the silver colored metal used in thermometers, dash. So that's the same thing, right? So we have the definition and it is covered from both sides with a dash, all right? So it can help us understand what is the definition of mercury. The next one is or. Sometimes we have a synonym of the word written after the word or. For example, the husky or a sled dog of the north is a hardy breed. So here in commas, after the word or, we have the synonym of the husky. So we now know what is husky. It's a sled dog, right? So we have it here, we have it after the word or. Sometimes this is how you find the definition of the word, okay? The next one is examples. Sometimes we don't have the definition of the word, but we have examples. And from the examples, it's very easy to understand what is the word. For example, percussion instruments such as drums, cymbals, and tambourines were the preferred instruments in the study. For example, we don't know what is percussion instruments, but we have all these examples and we understand, okay, we know drums, we know cymbals, tambourines, right? What people do, they like do something like this or they beat like this. So percussion instruments is probably those instruments where you beat, right? You beat or you like beat like this or you beat like this with the sticks. So these are the percussion instruments. Now we understand, right? So sometimes all these examples help us understand what is the word, even though we don't have any definition, right? We only have the examples. All right, the next one is pronouns. Sometimes we have a pronoun which helps us understand what is the word. For example, we don't know what is ERS1, but we have this pronoun, right? This satellite. The solar-powered batteries in the ERS1 are expected to function for at least 2 years, during which time this satellite will be able to gather more information than any previous satellite. So here we have the pronoun, this satellite, and now it's obvious for us that ERS1 is a satellite, right? So this pronoun helped us understand where is the synonym of this word. Okay, so pay attention to pronouns as well. All right, the next one is contrasts. So let's have a look at the contrast signals that are gonna tell you that at some point in the sentence we're gonna have the opposites, right? So we should look for the opposites. Okay, so such signals can be but, despite, however, in contrast, in spite of, instead, unlike, whereas. So if you see one of these words, it means that everything that follows this word contradicts everything that was before this word, right? So we have two opposite parts. There's some contradiction, some contrast going on, okay? And this contradiction can help you find out what is the definition of the word, all right? For example, the brief scenes in the movie focus on the boy's point of view, whereas the longer scenes depict the father's side. So here we have the signal whereas, and this is a contrast signal. It's the same as however, but, in spite of, etc. So we see that whereas divides our sentence into two parts. The first part is this one, the second part is this one. And these two parts contradict each other, right? So they create a contrast. And so because we suppose that we don't know the word brief, but we have this contrasting part, and here we have longer, that means that now we can guess that brief is shorter, right? Brief is short. So now, since we know that this is a contrast signal, we know that we're gonna look for the opposite definition. If we have the longer, this should mean the opposite, right? The short. Okay, so if we have the contrast signals, it in many cases help us understand what is the word by looking for its opposite in the other part of the sentence. All right? Okay. So the next one is the most common one. Sometimes you don't have that obvious the word to be, you know, salmon is a fish. Yeah, it's easy. Or sometimes you don't have just or commas, and then there's a definition ready for you to read it and understand. Sometimes it's just the entire context that helps you understand what the word is about, okay? For example, in order to sip the nectar with its long tongue, the bee must dive into the flower and in so doing becomes dusted with the fine pollen grains from the anthers. So here we supposedly don't know the word nectar and the word anthers, right? But we have to read this and understand what is the process they're describing, right? They're describing a bee and how it dives into a flower and how it produces honey. Yeah, we learned about it in school, right? So we know that there's nectar, that that liquid that the bee is trying to drink with its long tongue, right? So nectar is probably that liquid, right? If it is sipping the nectar from a flower, nectar is that liquid. Even if it sounds different in your language, then you already know what is nectar, right? In English, nectar is that liquid from the flower. Anthers. Now you see here that the bee becomes dusted with the fine pollen grains from the anthers. So you remember from your school lessons that the bee, when it's hanging out in the flower, it becomes dusted with something, right? With the dust from the flower. And this dust is what helps the flower grow and the more flowers grow. So now if the dust comes from anthers, now we understand, okay, anthers is that part of the flower, right? That part that produces that dust, which the bee then becomes covered in. So in this sentence, you don't really have all the definitions, right? There's nothing about the parts of the flower. There's nothing about the liquid from the flower. But since we know the process, since we know what they're talking about, it's very easy for us to fill all those blanks, to find out what the words mean. Okay, so because we are familiar with the process, it becomes easier for us. And this is the type of words in context which happens the most, which is the most popular. Other words in the sentence. Usually it's other words in the sentence that help you understand the definition of the word. So pay attention to the context, to other words in the sentence. It will help you a lot. Okay, so these were all the types of the word questions and all the types of the definitions and how do you look for them, right? So what do you pay attention when you are trying to understand what is definition of the word? So if you want to practice, there's a lot of exercises after this video where you can practice each one of these situations so that you can get a better idea of how to look for different definitions in different situations. There are also examples which are exactly like in the TOEFL test where you can practice more on the word questions, okay? So pay attention to these exercises. If you do them, they will help you a lot. And we will move to the next question type. Thanks for watching.